Okay, we're going to be taking a look at the game Washington's Crossing, which was published by Revolution Games in 2012, and the designer is Roger Miller. Now, I apologize if there's noise in the background. We've got some construction going on outside. Okay, I didn't purchase this game back in 2012. I was kind of busy back then, and well, like most wargamers, you just can't buy them all. So I got this second-hand copy, and I've only owned it for about a week now. And the fellow that had the copy did a very nice job. He laminated a lot of the charts, and he counterclipped the counters, so I appreciate that. The game that I got is in very, very good condition. I'm going to start the video by showing you the components to the game: the map, the counters, the charts, because these are all very well done. And then I'm going to sort of jump to the chase and give you my conclusions about the play of it. We're looking at the map now. That's north, with Amboy there, Brunswick. Here's Princeton, and Trenton is just here. The Delaware River, of course, and I'll pan down a bit to show you how far south it goes. And of course, Philadelphia down here. But the center of the action for most of the campaign, of course, is in the Trenton-Princeton area. It's a beautiful looking map. Terrain features are good and clear. My only little nitpick is that since Princeton and Trenton are winter battles, I would have liked to have the map with a little bit more wintry look, but that's just my little wee pet peeve. It's a fine map, and it's very, very clear. We're going to take a look at the counters and the charts. The counters are clear. There's no question about that. They're fairly well laid out. And yet, for some reason, and I guess it's just me, they don't appeal to me very much. I'm not sure what it is. You've got critical information. Top left, for example, is the activation cost of the leader. So Washington would spend 4 activation points to activate. This number here he calls the command span, but I find that term a little deceptive. It actually means the number of leaders Washington can activate. And the lower left is the leader rating for combat and things like that. And the bottom right is the command radius, how far his leaders can be. That's why these terms, command span and command radius, are, I don't know, just foggy to me. There you've got Earl Cornwallis there, and some other subordinate generals. Like I said, the counters are clear, but they just don't appeal to me very much. Now, over on the left here, we've got these command tracks. Okay? The command tracks are very important because they tell you the strength of the units below. So there are no strength point markers on the counters itself. All you're moving on the board are the leaders. So you have to continually look back and forth to the command point strengths and back to the leader units themselves. This can be pretty time consuming. And as you can see, I'll go from top to bottom. Those are the British leaders you're going to be keeping track of. And we'll just go down and you'll see the American leaders. There's quite a few. Now, there's advantages and disadvantages of that system. One is it keeps the counter clutter next to a minimum. You've virtually got just 1 or 2 counters on each hex. You're not stacking too much except for combat. So in that sense, the tracks serve their purpose. You also keep track of fatigue. Every time a unit moves, it accumulates fatigue, which you also move on this marker. Now, in that sense, it's very similar to the great campaigns of the Civil War system. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with the great campaigns of the Civil War, this is one of the more successful titles, Roads to Gettysburg 2. And in that game, you used mainly leaders on the map, and the strength point markers were underneath the leaders. So Roger, in his attempt to make a cleaner system, went to this track system. And no question, it is cleaner on the map. But I do find the going back and forth from the track back to the game a little disturbing. It takes away from the game to a great degree, at least for me anyway. I just find you're wasting a lot of time going back and forth looking at the track and the units on the board. Okay, the rule book is 23 pages long, and of that, about 19 pages are the actual rules themselves. They're laid out fairly well. There is a bit of errata that came out later. You'll want to get that. It is illustrated, showing you what the counters look like. Lots of tables, which I'm going to show you later. I can't criticize the rule book too much. It's fairly clear, although I would have loved an index. Finding a lot of games these days just don't have an index, and that's the way you find rules fast. And I bemoan the fact that there's no index in this game, because you're continually looking up rules. Now, the designer does admit in his designer notes that a lot of his ideas came from the great campaigns of the Civil War, and that's okay. I mean, the great campaigns of the Civil War is a wonderful system, and when I heard that this was kind of an American Revolution version of that system, this is why I bought Trenton and Princeton. You get very nice setup cards for the game, reminiscent going back to 1958 of Avalon Hill's Gettysburg. Actual pictures of the units, their strength, and what hex they begin on. And there's a quick start game card. And later on they released a Princeton scenario, which you can download off of Board Game Geek. Again, the setup. This is the scenario that I've been fooling around with. You have a Washington crossing percentage loss table. Again, a nitpick, and it's only me. I'm not a great fan of percentage loss tables because, I don't know, inevitably you have to go to a chart to figure out how many men are lost, or you pull out the calculator like I do. More charts and tables all on one side. Like I said, the fellow I bought it from laminated his, and more tables. This game has a lot of tables and a lot of procedures. Now, this isn't technically a table. It's a battle report card to help you write down the modifiers and all the things that matter when you do come to a battle. And I'll get to that in a moment when I show you kind of what you have to go through to fight a battle. Now, lest you cry out in horror for me damaging the original booklet, this is a copy of the rules. I usually learn all my games by making copies. This way I can highlight rules and obscure cases to help me learn the game. But what I'm trying to show here is the sequence of play, and it is extremely detailed. A lot of the tactical games or operational games do have a detailed sequence of play, and I'm used to that, no problem. But this one has so many procedures, it gets a little unwieldy after a while. Because though you follow the sequence of play, in each of these pulses that you do, there are multiple things you do within those pulses. For example, the weather phase. Most games you'd roll a die and you'd determine the weather. Well, for every little wee pulse, there's almost 2 or 3 procedures for each procedure. I'll try to show you what I mean. Now, this isn't a criticism of the simulation. It is a very good simulation of the Trenton and Princeton campaign. For example, when you do come to the weather phase, you're going to roll on this die, on this table. And for example, it'll say if you roll a 3, continue if it's freezing, otherwise new weather. And if you get to new weather, then you roll on this. Okay, simple enough. And then you will record that fact on a track way there up in the left-hand corner, what the weather is and what the weather was the turn before. So, okay, that's not bad. But the battle procedure is, wow, I almost want to say nightmarish. But let's zoom in on a typical battle that I just played and showed you what you have to go through to resolve it. Now, as an example, I had a battle here between von Donop's forces and these 3 forces under Fermoy, Stephen, and Ewing. They're all stacked here. And von Donop was attacking across this Assunpink Creek. And I'm going to try to show you the procedures you have to go through to resolve this battle. Like any war game, you're going to have to add up the size of the forces. In this case, von Donop and the 3 forces I mentioned before. So, how do you do that? Well, as I mentioned, you're going to look up von Donop. You're going to have to go over to the forces chart for the British, find von Donop, and unfortunately the leaders are not arranged in strict alphabetical order, so you're continually going up and down this chart looking for von Donop. There he is. He's got, 1,960 men. Well, that's nice. By the way, you better write that down because you're not going to remember it. Now, your opponent, of course, will be adding up his forces, which is Stephen, Ewing, and Fermoy. Now, in a solitaire game, you're going to have to be doing this all alone. But your opponent will be doing this, of course, in a 2-player game. But he's going to have to look up on his chart all these leaders, 3 of those leaders. Again, they're not in alphabetical order. And it's a good idea if you write them down. Because, again, you're not going to remember these numbers 2 minutes later. I forgot to mention that before you even do that, you're going to be rolling on this surprise table with a whole host of modifiers to see if you've achieved surprise, which will give a final modifier to the CRT. So you actually do that first. Again, a 2-step process. You roll on the table, but you're going to have to be cognizant of all these modifiers. Now, like all other war games, you're then going to compare the attacker combat factors to the defenders to determine the attack ratio. Now, did you remember that 3,280 men were attacking 1,420? If you didn't, you're going to be very sorry because you're going to have to look them up again on that chart. That's why you write this stuff down. And I'll get to some of the player aids which somebody has produced to make that procedure a lot easier. Now, the next step would be to calculate the final combat modifier, because there will be things like terrain, and whether it's a prepared attack or a hasty attack, all these make a difference, as they did in the great campaigns of the Civil War system. You can certainly see where this combat system is derived from. It's like a cousin of the great campaigns of the Civil War system. The final step, of course, will be to roll on the CRT itself, and that is modified by the attacker leader rating. And these are your modifiers again. You have to be cognizant of all these here. Then when you finally get a roll, it's going to give you the percentage loss for the attacker, the defender, and whether the attacker or defender retreats. And you're going to be wanting to write this stuff down, because while you're calculating the percentage loss for one side, you may forget what the size of the defender is when you're doing his calculations. So I would have to say that the game is extremely procedural. There are a lot of procedures, but it produces a very good simulation of the Trenton-Princeton campaign. No question about that. The designer has gone to a lot of work. Now, here's this chart that somebody made up. I didn't use it when I was fooling around. Perhaps I should have. But you can see the work involved to do a battle. you're supposed to write down the leader here, what hex he's in, what troops, and how fatigued he is. And then you're supposed to write down the leader, the troops, and how fatigued the defender is. Then you've got an attacker total, defender total. Then you've got these outflanking modifiers. Then you've got all these other modifiers. And after you do all that, you put down here the final combat modifier. Here's a little surprise table. So somebody has consolidated this stuff into a procedure whereby what I've just described to you is made a bit more manageable. And of course, depending on the victory, how many losses you inflicted, you'll either have a major victory, or a moderate victory, or a minor victory, or it's just a skirmish. So all that just to resolve one battle between two hexes. I got to the point where I was moving and maneuvering, and I sort of got to the point where, oh boy, do I really want to have a battle and go through all this again? Not really. So let's do a summation of what I think of Washington's Crossing. Okay, in summary, what am I trying to say? Well, this game is a detailed game about the campaign of Princeton and Trenton. The designer's gone to a lot of work to get things right. In particular, I think his weather rules are the best I've seen for this campaign. I've been reading a lot about Trenton and Princeton, and to have any idea of what this campaign is like, you've got to understand the weather. The weather made a big difference in this campaign. Whether the Delaware is frozen or not, whether it rained. Weather is everything in this campaign, and it could change in a matter of hours. Not like where you roll the weather for one day and it's the same for 2 or 3 days. This is very variable weather, and it will change the game considerably. I think that's one of the key points about this game as a simulation. It's a very good simulation of the Trenton-Princeton campaign. The look of it. Well, I think it looks great. It's a nice looking game, no question. My little nitpick is I wish it had more of a winter look, but I cannot fault the designer for the map. It's very well done. The counters I've already mentioned, they're perfectly functional. They're just really not my bag. And again, I do stress that it is a good simulation. At one point, people were speculating if there would be other titles in this series. And as it turns out, no other titles were made. Why weren't they made? I think it's because the system is too detailed, too procedural for its own good. The track idea, it's not a bad idea, but I almost would have preferred just putting strength mark counters underneath the counters as they did in Great Campaigns of the Civil War. If it had followed the Great Campaigns of the Civil War model, I think it would have been a bit more successful. But right now, it is so procedural, I just don't know if I will break this out to play very much. The other thing is teaching it to somebody. I would not recommend this game as an introductory game to someone just getting into wargaming. If they played this as their first game, it might turn them off from wargaming forever. So this system, this game, is more for your aficionado, someone who really likes the campaign, is interested in the revolution. So this game is certainly not for everyone. I really don't like knocking a game, especially after someone's gone to so much work in this thing. Like I said, it's a labor of love, it's a well-done game. But I have to be honest in my appraisal of it as a game. It's, I don't know, I just didn't find it very much fun to play. I was so involved in procedures, I really didn't have time to concentrate on strategy. Now, it very well could be that in playing solitaire, and that's the way I played it here, I did not play with an opponent. First of all, I'd have to have an opponent that knows the rules and knows how to play the game too. But my gut feeling is that this thing would be rather slow to play. God knows how many hours it would take to finish a campaign. Probably 8 hours at least to finish it. And for what it is, such a small affair as at Trenton and Princeton, I just don't know if this game is my cup of tea. So anyway, that's my evaluation of Washington's Crossing, and Thank you for watching.